Right, I'm Graham Dennis. I grew up down on the Maylands Peninsula. I'm the son of Bill Dennis and Joyce Dennis of Dennis Power Saws. Dennis Power Saws, as you can see up on the screen at the moment there, was started back in the early 40s by my father and uncle. Dad had a vision to start Dennis Power Saws after my grandfather had sawmills out at Wanneroo. As I said before, I'll be keeping this talk to around about 40 minutes. Hopefully I'll have enough time to get it all in. This is one of the pamphlets from years ago that Dad put out for this power saws when he first started the business off. This is a picture of my father in one of his early days. It would have been around about the time when Mum and Dad had met. Picture of previous picture. This is a picture of my mother and father. My mother was born Hazel Joyce Dennis, but she goes by Joyce because she didn't love Hazel. They were a big part of the business, Mum was. And this is a picture of my uncle. Uncle Harry and Dad worked together for many years. Dad was 17 years younger than the uncle. Uncle Harry was one of the workers. Dad was an instigator of starting the business. This is a picture of the house. Sorry. This is a picture of the house originally where the boatyard, Maylands boatyard, is now. This is the house that I grew up in, and the factory that I'll talk about later on that uncle and father and family built. This would have been directly across. This is in Hardy Road, Maylands, 38 Hardy Road, Maylands. This was the picture of the uncle's house directly across from where the factory was. This is where the uncle built his house about the same time that Dad started the business at 38 Hardy Road, Maylands. It's just my grandfather. My grandfather originally started off really Dennis Power Saws from Wanneroo. Grandfather was a pioneer of Wanneroo, and he actually had 2 sawmills out at Wanneroo. He looked much like old stepson son, actually. He was a big instigator of the business. They started off. This is a picture of a power saw one of the first power saws that were built in WA. It was a drag saw that my uncle and grandfather built at Wanneroo for cutting logs. They used to cut 8-inch blocks for these out of this saw, and the 8-inch blocks were cut into blocks to make the timber roads around Wanneroo and in Perth. There was actually some blocks when I was a kid in the town hall in Perth, you could still see the block roads at the town hall in Perth City itself. This saw was made out of some old car parts, a rugby engine, and a lot of old car parts that they used to build that. This was a picture of at Wanneroo. It was the community hall and picture theatre that my family built. The grandfather built that with the uncle, and they also had the service station right next door to the town hall out there, or community centre as such. They run the picture theatre there. This is a picture of Bill Shilstead factory at the end of Hardy Road, and the first Dennis power saws that Dad and the uncle and the grandfather built at Wanneroo. They designed the Shilstead power saw, which was a Dennis power saw. Shilstead actually manufactured the Dennis power saw under the Dennis patent. It was a gear-driven saw in them days. The head of the saw was gear-driven, and you could swing a 48-inch blade. It was purely a mechanical driven blade in them days. Just pointing out there the drive on the power saw. In them days, everything I did at Wanneroo, as I say, this saw was designed in Wanneroo, and Shilstead eventually took over the patent. The grandfather at Wanneroo also had a bus service out there, and he used to run the buses out to northern beaches from there as well. So he's a big part of Wanneroo community, and this is where the idea of motor-driven power saws came from Wanneroo and the grandfather. The Shilstead power saws, Bill Shilstead produced around about 2,000 units in the Shilstead factory in them days. The uncle and my father, after Dad come back from the war, worked for Bill Shilstead producing some of these power saws. Dad had saved about £500 up in the war and always had in his mind to start his own business. But after they left they bought a block of land. After they left Bill Shilstead, bought a block of land where the boatyard is now in Hardy Road, and they started to design their own saws. This is a picture of one of the Bill Shilstead saws at Wanneroo, and behind that is a drag saw as well. A lot of these saws had Velocity engines in them, and Dad actually imported engines from England. A lot of them had Villiers and AGS engines, and which are the first models that Dad had built. A lot of the heads of these saws were moulded in Perth, and they used parts out of the diffs to put in the head of the saws to drive the blade. This is a picture of Dad's first factory. That's actually my mother standing out the front of the factory there. In the top of this factory is a mezzanine floor. I just pointed out there where my father and mother used to live when they first started the business off. This factory had some an old lathe in it, an old belt lathe, and Dad built a furnace at the rear. This is where the start of the new Dennis power saws originally started in Hardy Road, 38 Hardy Road. As I said before, Dad had £500 in the war. These ones. A lot of the design of the Dennis power saws from Dad. My uncle actually drew all the blueprints and things up from the new Dennis power saw, and they slowly grew their business. So, as I said before, all the designs were from the Dennis power saws. The blueprints were done by the uncle. Most of the technical stuff was presented by my father. He learnt a lot in the war, and I've actually had some old books of his that I found that I will be putting into the museum. The factory also had a compressor there. It was an engine out of one of the old trams in them days, the old buses. And Dad and the uncle built a big compressor out of that to run all the furnaces. Furnaces were run by compressed air and oil. Once it was lit up, they used to use that to melt all their cast iron, bronze and aluminium as well. So I actually worked for Dad in the factory. My first job was shoveling sand in the foundry, and I worked my way up through into the mechanical side of things in the factory in them days when I would have only been 14, 15 year old when I first started with my father. This is a factory the new factory that my father built on the property. It was a 2-storey factory that Dad and the uncle built. They built this themselves. Day and night they used to work, so my cousin informed me in them days. He helped to do it. They used to work at night with lights. The factory originally was only supposed to be a single story, but Dad and the uncle built it 2-storey. The authorities never ever questioned why it was a double story and not a single story. I did find out later on in years that Dad had to pay extra insurance because of the airport being close by. So he paid extra insurance on the factory for that reason. That was the house that I grew up in. The top story of the factory was never used much. The top story of the factory in them days, Dad and Mum used to keep that for functions and parties and things. Dad used to do a lot of charity work and that, mainly for the blind school and a lot of the churches that around Maylands and that. Dad was fairly big on helping people around the Maylands area. Mum and Dad used to have up to 200, 250 people at a time on the parties that they held on top of the factory there. My mother and aunt used to cater for all that themselves. In this factory, with the furnaces and things, they had their own bake ovens as well. With the furnaces, they used to do all their own moulding, bake ovens for doing the mouldings. This is a picture of one of the drag saws. The type of engines, type of saws that Dad built was a single cylinder drag saws with a new design there that are used in the timber industry for the Carry and Jarrah area. As I said before, the blueprints are all done by the uncle. This is a picture of the twin cylinder circular saw. Had its own power drives, as I just pointed out there. That's the power drives for these saws. Used to swing a 48-inch blade on these. In the factory that Dad and the uncle built, they used to have 20, 25 men working for him at the time. Moulders, welders and mechanical people who put everything together and assembled all the engines. Everything was made in the factory. Everything from the carburettors right through. The only things that weren't built, made in the factory was the saw blade, the tyres and the saws. The carburettors and everything else was all made. The only thing that was bought outside was the bearings and the belts. It was a belt-driven saw, these saws were. Dad gained all his knowledge in the Air Force, and from all the books that I've read and had a look at, I never knew how Dad gained all the knowledge to build these engines. He must have been sucking up knowledge his whole time in the Air Force when he was in the Air Force. Dad, at the time, I think Dennis power saws produced about 3,000 power saws. A lot of these some went to New Zealand, some went to New Guinea. Mostly in Australia. They were in the timber industry here in Western Australia, in the Jarrah and Curry country. With the advance of chainsaws, the Dennis power saw business started to die out. Chainsaws were a lot more versatile in the bush. What Dad and the uncle did, they diversified into the slipyard business, the Maylands Slipyards, and we used to cater to the crayfishing industry at that time. They eventually had 3 slipyards, slip rails down here where the boatyard is now in Maylands. Dad started off the original slipyards there. They catered for about 60 to 70 cray boats a year at the time. This is a picture of the boatyard as it stands at the moment. It used to be quite different in my time when I was there. There used to be 60 to 70 cray boats. These are some of the cray boats we used to have at the time down there, and we used to get the cranes in to lift them off the slipyards. They can put them into their own cradles and do all their maintenance work on them, maintenance on the hulls, props and engines. We used to do all the mechanical work in the factory on the engines, rebuilding diesel engines, what have you out there. We used to make all the cray pot winches for winching the cray pots out of the water. We also produced cray pot tippers on the side of the boat, pulling the pots out of the water. They used to tip them onto the boats. Dad also had a patent on the cray pot tippers. It was a fairly large business at the time in the fishing industry. That kept the Dennis Powers going for a long while. They were still using the power saw, servicing the power saw industry, but the slipyard business was a large part of the business at the time down there. We also built our own 50-foot boat at the time there. The frame of the boat, the pattern of the boat was built on top of the factory, all in once there. They transported the patterns down below, built a big shed and built our big boat in the shed. It was a double plank boat that they built, and Dad crayfished that for many years. The boat was called the Dennis, after the Dennises. The boat that we built was a large boat. You could walk under the decks without hitting your head. That was the Bonaparte. That was one of Norman de Lacy's boats of the de Lacy family in Maylands. That was his original boat that he used to crayfish in up at Two Rocks. We had Bob Bugle's boat as well. Sharky Nelson. He used to be in the news with sharks. This is a picture of my grandfather's caravan. He used to live down on the Swan River, right at the edge. This is in the flood time. When the floods used to come up in them days, it used to flood up to the grandfather's caravan there, as you can see. In later years, the floods weren't so much, but back when I was very young, I remember the floods coming right up. In the picture there is my mother, aunt, my father and grandfather. As I said, that was a big part of the business, was the boat business and the crayfishing boats every year. This is a picture of the Dennis when she was moored out on the river. Only used to just get under the bridges. She was a rather large boat. You only just get under the bridge at Bunbury Bridge there. Yeah, the boat, when I used to go with Dad there, one day we had big waves out there, and one wave come over the top. I was in cooking breakfast. I used to cook breakfast, and I never used to have to roll the sausages. The sausages roll in the pan themselves. One day we were out there, and I come flying at Dad and said, the windows just went green, Dad. He said, you better hang on because there's another wave coming. We went over, and through the next three, there was 3 big waves in a row. This is a picture of where we were building that big boat, and this is my uncle, L.B. Clements here. L.B. Clements used to have a plasterboard business over in where the Perth Airport is now. When the Perth Airport was built, he had to get out of there for the Perth Airport to be built, so he moved his plasterboard business to our property on Hardy Road, Maylands there. He built a side off of where we built that big boat, and he built all these tables there from making the plasterboard. All the plasterboard was built in them days out of coconut husk and wool, and he used to do all the architrave type work, all the ornamental stuff as well, but he had a big plasterboard business out of this as well. So that's another part of the Maylands history there that no one knew about. Yeah, you all remember the Kings Park log. This is the log that was in Kings Park. The Dennis power saws actually cut that down. Whittaker's cut that log down with the Dennis power saws and trimmed it with the one of the Dennis power saws, drag saws. They transported that up to Kings Park. Here's the transport through the city. It was transported in 3 pieces on the trucks right through the city. This is the transport coming through the Perth city itself. Back in, would have been in the early 40s, I think it was. Another one of the transport on the trucks. I think they look like they're old Leyland trucks. This is a large jarrah log at Dwellingup. I just had been to Dwellingup and happened to take a photo up while I was there. This is another log that was cut down by Whittaker's as well. It would have been with one of the Dennis power saws at the time. But rather large timbers that the Dennis power saws had cut down. I remember myself even being in the Carry country and the amount of logs that I cut down with chainsaws myself. So it would have been a rather large job cutting them down with the Dennis power saw in them days, and bring your power saws all through the bush. Here's a picture of my cousins at the time, making your own fun down on the Maylands Peninsula. Gwen on the right hand side, she actually won the Perth swim through back in 1952, and my cousin Norma on the left hand side, I think she came about 4th in that one. But they used to go through in all the swim throughs, the Perth swim throughs and the Maylands swim throughs. The Maylands swim through used to go from Bath Street down the right hand side there, down past where the slipyards are now, and back past and back to Caledonian Avenue or Bath Street at the time. This is a picture of me with my first go-karts. I used to run the go-karts down where the tennis courts and the bowling greens are now, which are moved down there. It was all reclaimed land down there. Now there is, but it used to just be a swamp area down there, and I used to run my go-kart around down the swamp area. And also when the Maylands aerodrome shut down, I run my go-karts down on the airstrip down there. That was my first try at a go-kart. I built better ones after a while. But we used to swim and water ski for all our fun at the time down there. Used to swim just about every day, water ski every day. No, not every day. But then we had a tennis court at the uncle's house, at the uncle's place that I showed you earlier when we first started off. We had a tennis court behind there. This is a picture of Macalindon's, corner of Peninsula Road and East Street. That my mother used to do all her shopping out of this store at the time. Let's just about finish there. This is a picture of my father in the war years with my uncle. They say that Dad used to look like Errol Flynn in this picture. It's my uncle Reuben Gibbs. His family was from Wanneroo as well, and the Gibbses have a lot of market gardens and things out at Wanneroo. There's actually some streets named after the Gibbses out at Wanneroo there. This is Dad not long before he passed away, still using one of his power saws. That was in Johnson Road, just around from Hardy Road. It was the back of my property that I had there, and Dad was cutting some sleepers for someone there. Dad was still working up until the day he died. I've still got a lathe of his. He was working on the lathe the day before he died, and he passed away in 1995, New Year's Eve. He was 75 years old and he died. So that's about the end of what we had. The peninsula down there where I grew up was a wonderful place to grow up, and pretty proud of the Dennis family, what they produced down there, and the amount of people they employed through the years, and a lot of the charity work that they did down there. So I hope I didn't bore you all, and I hope this talk was beneficial to you. And thank you very much.